welcome to the Kyle Olson Show. If you're looking for fun and happiness, sadly, this isn't the show for you today. As we're attempting to live through failed vice presidential prospect Gretchen Whitmer's never-ending and, in fact, increasing lockdown, there is a massive price being paid. Here is Dr. Robert Redfield, Director of the Centers for Disease Control.
But there has been another cost that we've seen, particularly in high schools. We're seeing, sadly, far greater suicides now than we are deaths from COVID. We're seeing far greater deaths from drug overdose that are above excess of what we had as background than we are seeing deaths from COVID.
Phil Kerpen, the president of the Committee for Prosperity, shared that video on Twitter. He also shared some very disturbing statistics. The number of Americans aged 18 to 24 who have seriously considered suicide in the past 30 days, 25.5%. 1/4 of young people have seriously considered suicide in the past 30 days. 16% of age 25 to 44-year-olds. Gretchen Whitmer, do you care? Randy Weingarten, do you care? You claim to care about children. You will gladly use children as props. For those of you who don't know, Randy Weingarten is president of the American Federation of Teachers. She's called for safety strikes to keep schools closed. She's trying to leverage the fear and concern to extract more money from the federal government. Oh, and let's not forget, get votes for Joe Biden in November. That's what she's about. That's all she's about. A few kids killing themselves? Collateral damage, as long as her union has power. One thing she won't talk about, a thing Joe Biden won't talk about, is the logistics, the practical situation when parents become the education managers when a student is at home. Very shortly, parents in Michigan and across the country are going to be dealing with this. How does that work when you have parents working and suddenly an elementary school student is expected to sit in front of a screen for a school day, an entire school day? Good or bad, our modern society was built on the premise that kids go to school in person. The unionists who don't want to go back to work like to say, "We aren't babysitters. I'm not going to risk my life just so kids can go back to school." First of all, it's interesting. That's how they view their job, is a babysitter. But if parents suddenly become the education managers, that changes the equation and the dynamics. We saw that this spring. The government is failing at providing education, and now that schools are not reopening, it's time for the government to get out of the education business. Public schools are a service of the government, like snow plowing or policing. What would happen if a city came out and said, "Okay, this winter, we need residents to take turns plowing the roads. We'll provide the truck. We'll make sure it's gassed up. We'll make sure it's got salt. The plow is sharp. But we need you to be there at 4 a.m. on Tuesday to drive it. Or we can only afford to have one officer in a patrol vehicle. So we need residents to take turns being their partner." You may not have the training. You may not have the know-how. You may not have the mental capacity to be able to be in a high-pressure situation, but that doesn't matter. That's just the way it is. You got to deal with it. Would that be tolerated? Wouldn't people say, "Hey, wait a minute. We're not getting what we're paying for, so something has to change, and for our benefit, not for the benefit for the bureaucracy and the unions and the education blob"? Why are government schools the sacred cow in our society? A city where Randy Weingarten and the AFT loom large? Chicago. The killing of black lives is rampant there. I don't have to tell you that. Far more than coronavirus. And when a wave of looting and crime swept through the downtown this week, Mayor Lori Lightfoot blamed, among other things, guns supposedly coming in from other states. Did you see that video of the white Audi that was used to ram the store so looters could get in? Did that car come from out of state too? Does that matter? Or is it just about guns? In a couple minutes, I'm going to be talking to AWR Hawkins, who's one of my colleagues at Breitbart News. He's a Second Amendment correspondent. He writes a lot about what's going on in Chicago, and I just wanted to share a couple of these stories, a couple of his findings, before I talk to him after the break. He wrote in mid-July that Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, says Chicago needs more gun control. She said there are, quote, easy things that can be done in response to all of the violence going on. One of them is more gun control. Here's what she said, quote, "If the president was really committed to helping us deal with our violence, he would do some easy things. He would push for universal background checks. He would push for an assault weapons ban. He would push to make sure that people who are banned from getting on airplanes can't get guns." Well, first of all, that whole prospect has been debunked because, for good or bad, it doesn't work. But what AWR found was, and in fact, in 2015, he wrote about a University of Chicago crime lab study where they interviewed Cook County jail inmates who said that they get their guns on the streets from, quote, personal connections rather than outlets like gun shows or stores or the internet. Is that really a surprise? Crime Lab co-director Harold Pollack said the study shows that, quote, some of the pathways people are concerned about don't seem so dominant. Gun shows, stores, the internet, crossing state lines. He said very few inmates indicated using gun shows or the internet. Rather, they get the guns in undetectable ways on the street. What a surprise. Lori Lightfoot said at the end of July, just a couple weeks ago, our gun problem is related to the fact that we have too many illegal guns on our streets, 60% of which come from states outside of Illinois. She went on to say, we are being inundated with guns from states that have virtually no gun control, no background checks, no ban on assault weapons. That is hurting cities like Chicago. So I went to the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence. Of course, this was set up by Gabby Giffords, who is very anti-Second Amendment. I think if she had her way, there would be no guns. And so this Giffords Law Center is not going to look kindly on the Second Amendment and gun rights. And I want to read to you background check procedures in Indiana according to the Giffords Law Center. Quote, Indiana law explicitly requires dealers to conduct a background check prior to transferring a handgun by contacting the FBI directly. Although Indiana has no law explicitly requiring firearms dealers to initiate a background check prior to transferring a long gun or a rifle, the federal law requires dealers to initiate a background check prior to the transfer of any kind of gun by contacting the FBI directly. So federal law controls guns in Indiana, in Illinois, in Michigan. That's the point of federal law. Do I have to really explain this to Lori Lightfoot?
We do not need federal troops in Chicago. Period, full stop. I'm sure the president will have his way with this incident, but I'm calling upon him to do the things that we do need. We need common sense gun control. We cannot continue to have circumstances where anybody and their brother can go across the border or in other parts of Illinois and bring illegal guns into the city of Chicago. That is something that the federal government is uniquely qualified to handle, and we need the president to step up and do that.
Also, at the end of July, AWR, he's a very busy writer. He wrote that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, the ATF, showed that 5,337 guns recovered in Illinois were traced and sourced as coming from Illinois. But wait a minute. Lori Lightfoot told me 60%. Oh, wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. 14 other states accounted for a total of 4,375 guns recovered in Illinois and traced to their source. Those states were Indiana, Missouri, Wisconsin, Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Texas, Ohio, Georgia, Iowa, Alabama, Florida, Arkansas, and Michigan. A total of 792 other guns were recovered and sourced among a group of 34 other states. So what I admit I went to a government school, so I'm trying to do my government school math here, but a majority of the guns come from Illinois. And I would say a small percentage come from Indiana. The ATF's 2018 figures also show that guns recovered and traced to source are over 9 times more likely to be pistols, handguns, than rifles of any kind. But what Lori Lightfoot will tell you is that Indiana's the problem, not our culture, not the trash that kids see on YouTube videos, not family situations, not poor schools, poorly performing schools. They're rich in resources, but guns. Coming up next, AWR Hawkins will shed some more truth on what's going on in Chicago. This is the Kyle Olson Show. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. Joining me now to talk about the anti-Second Amendment propaganda coming out of Chicago is Second Amendment correspondent for Breitbart News, AWR Hawkins. So Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot used the crime spree in downtown Chicago this week as an excuse to call for more gun control and has claimed that guns are coming from out of state, namely Indiana, and that is to blame. But AWR, what have you found?
Well, Kyle, we did an article at Breitbart, I believe it was a week and a half, 2 weeks, something like that ago, where we looked at ATF numbers for 2018. Those are the most recent numbers I could find. And those numbers found that the vast majority of guns recovered in Chicago and traced to their origin, that they were sourced to Illinois. Over 5,300 guns sourced to Illinois. And again, that consists of guns recovered in Chicago and traced. Now, the next largest group was a little over 4,300 guns that were from out of state, but guess what? They weren't from out of state as in 4,300 guns from Indiana or 4,300 guns from Wisconsin. They were out of state in that there were 4,300 guns from a total of 25 other states. In other words, 40 from this one, 80 from this one, 90 from this one. But the state, the vast majority of guns sourced in Chicago. That state was Illinois with over 5,300. That's what the ATF numbers show.
So what do you think, and maybe we're sort of trying to get into people's heads here, but what do you think is the real objective? Because, Lori Lightfoot, she's the mayor of the third largest city in the country. She can get whatever data, whatever advice she wants. Why do you think she goes out and says 60% of the guns are coming from out of state when the data shows otherwise?
Well, I think because her goal as a leftist is to secure universal background checks on a national level, to secure a quote-unquote assault weapons ban on a national level, to secure other gun controls like that on a national level. And, I'm sure your listeners are keen to these kind of things. So I don't want to talk like anyone doesn't understand, but I think we always have to be reminded that leftists are ideologues, and an ideologue will sacrifice even his constituents or her constituents' own well-being to secure their agenda. And that's why you have Lori Lightfoot pushing an assault weapons ban, Kyle, when there's already an assault weapons ban for the Chicago area because Cook County has an assault weapons ban. So see, there's so many contradictions here, but no one sees these contradictions because Lightfoot uses gun control as a deflection. And instead of dealing with the problem, she deflects and pushes for more gun control, even though a lot of the gun control she pushes would either be effective or is already in existence.
What is the definition of an assault weapon?
That's such a good question. I know you know it is. I'll tell you this. People should Google the assault weapons myth, those three words, assault weapons myth, and then do the plus sign and do Breitbart. Because I did an article, Kyle, I believe it was a few years ago, on, of all places, a New York Times article. And the New York Times admitted that in the 1990s, the Democrats created the term assault weapons so that they could then justify banning those weapons and that they could claim political gain, that they could claim they were fighting crime. This is all true. I know it sounds so strange, it sounds like fiction, but it's all true. And again, it's the assault weapons myth. If someone Googles those three words, then the plus sign in Breitbart, they can read that. But it originally came out of the New York Times in the 1990s, and they were basically saying, look, the Clinton administration wants to be able to claim that they've banned or they've reduced crime, so they're going to have a politically created gun category, and then they're going to ban those guns. And so to answer your question, what they did is they would take a rifle like an AR-15. The AR-15 was not an assault weapon. It became an assault weapon if it had a flash hider, a thumb hole stock, 30-round magazine, those kinds of things. That's a myth that people think in and of itself you could even buy an assault weapon, quote unquote. I bought one of my favorite AR-15s right in the middle of the assault weapons ban. The catch is it has no flash hider and it doesn't have a collapsible stock. Other than that, it is a normal operating AR-15.
So you wrote July 29th, the ATF says the majority of guns recovered in Illinois are from Illinois. And there's this, you end with this line. The ATF's 2018 figures show that guns recovered and traced to the source are over 9 times more likely to be pistols than rifles of any kind. So if there was a quote-unquote assault weapons ban, would that change that number?
Well, no, Kyle, because I have other pieces on Breitbart through the years showing that I believe, I don't want to misstate, but I believe over 4 times as many people are stabbed to death each year than are killed with rifles of any kind. I draw that from FBI crime stats. Over 4 times as many people are stabbed to death as are killed with rifles of any kind. And when you think of rifles of any kind, you're thinking about bolt action, lever action, breech action, pump, and then you get into the semi-automatic and eventually a small category called quote-unquote assault weapons. So assault weapons make up just a small slither of rifles of any kind. Mm-hmm. So if over 4 times as many people are stabbed to death and killed with rifles of any kind, who knows how many more people are stabbed to death than killed with an AR-15? The number would be hard to fathom, or the ratio, because it would be so minimal as far as the AR-15 is concerned. But it makes your point that you could have a quote-unquote assault weapons ban. That's not the weapon criminals are using anyway, so it won't change anything.
Right. And so the data shows that pistols are being used. And in fact, I saw some images on social media of the individual who fired at police and then was shot by police, which they claim, triggered the whole rioting and looting that happened. And he was using a pistol. That is, at least according to the data, that's what the criminals use, is a pistol. So for Lori Lightfoot to come out and say, we need to do a assault weapons ban and we need to have more background checks. And that was the other question I wanted to ask you. There are background checks now. What is a universal background check?
Well, that's a misnomer. I mean, the phrase universal background check is disinformation to begin with, because what they're trying to do is give you the impression that it's a different kind of background check. It's the exact same background check we have. We've had checks since 1998, mandatory federal checks on all retail sales since 1998. What the Democrats want to do is expand those checks as far as expanding when they occur, so that they also include private gun sales. Be the exact same check, but it would just also mean that you couldn't sell a gun to your lifelong neighbor unless you went through a federal agent for a background check. And what they don't tell you is the outcome of that is that private gun sales are criminalized. In other words, I couldn't sell a 5-shot revolver to my lifelong friend if just on my own. If I failed to do a background check, I would be criminalized for that. And so that's really the whole goal. And I believe the end game, Kyle, is that allows them to close the loophole for guns that they don't have paperwork on, because they didn't begin background checks till 1998. And who knows how many gazillion guns were already in circulation then. They have no paperwork on those guns. So if they could put universal background checks into place now and start following private sales, they believe they could better figure out who owns guns, where they keep guns. And ultimately, this sounds like conspiracy talk, but it's just reality. Ultimately, what that means is that when the country follows California's lead and wants to confiscate, they'll know which addresses to go to so they can confiscate guns.
And they honestly expect the people who are rioting and looting in downtown Chicago are going to contact a federal agent to say, I would like to sell this gun to someone else. Is that okay? I mean, they really expect that to happen. AWR Hawkins is Second Amendment correspondent for Breitbart News. Thanks for joining me today.
Kyle, it's great to be with you. Thank you.
This is the Kyle Olson Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. So I have the very first inaugural segment of Kyle's Cigar Club, and I'm joined today in the inaugural segment by TJ Suchocki and Karl Erickson. So thanks for joining me on this very first segment. So we're going to talk about this very interesting opinion piece in Newsweek titled Some Questions for Kamala Harris About Eligibility. And it gets into this very legal argument about whether or not Kamala Harris is eligible to serve as vice president. Because if you aren't eligible to serve as vice president, because you're not a natural-born citizen, you're not able to serve as president. And so this piece is written by John C. Eastman, professor of law at Chapman University, and he's also senior fellow at the Claremont Institute. And he goes into this very detailed argument, basically arguing that because Kamala Harris's parents were not citizens, there's an argument to be made that she is not eligible to serve. For example, I have to scroll down here a bit. It says, I'm quoting from him, "The original Constitution does not define citizenship, but the 14th Amendment does. And it provides that, quote, all persons born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens. And because Kamala Harris's parents were not fully subject to the laws of the United States, because they were not citizens, Kamala Harris is not a natural-born citizen." So this, of course, is not the first time this has come up. But, TJ, what is your reaction to this?
Well, what I think is, I look back at history, and we had a plan in place for Ted Cruz if he was going to be nominated as a Republican. And I look back at John McCain, and both of them, had some sort of circumstance. I think Ted Cruz had one parent that was Canadian, and one that was a U.S. citizen, and John McCain was born outside of the country, but born to U.S. citizen parents. I see those as distinctly different than her situation. Her parents were definitely not citizens. But do I think that's going to matter? Probably not, especially with her. I mean, everybody surrounding her doesn't really care about the Constitution. Look at her laughing about taking everybody's guns away if we don't do something in 100 days.
It's one is the Constitution and the roadblock.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I definitely think it's distinct from the two arguments being made from recent history as far as people on the left go. It's 100% distinct from the John McCain and Ted Cruz thing. But is it going to make any difference?
Well, and that's the issue, because the point that John Eastman is making is that the court has moved in the direction of, as long as you are born in the United States, you're considered a natural-born citizen. But how do you think this would throw the race into chaos if the Supreme Court did get involved and did rule against her?
Well, I think it would be. Personally, I like her as a pick for Joe Biden because I think she's absolutely terrible. And why would they pick a cop when they're protesting against police? But I think it would be terrible for Trump and great for Biden, and maybe it was strategic because that would give something for Democrats to actually get behind and band together about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if there's any precedent for this. I know there's been vice presidents that have been ditched quickly after. Like Spiro Agnew and stuff, but I could be wrong, but I also don't think that honestly this will gain a lot of traction because, as you've said, this has been the precedent with Cuban immigrants, and there's a lot of people here who I have personal friends who have a work visa who came here from Europe, just had a baby who is now considered a citizen, and so it would kind of throw all that into question too. Well, how do you define what a citizen really is? And I think that precedent has been set by the courts. So I see this as a non-starter.
So you brought up Kamala Harris as a running mate, period, setting aside this whole legal argument. It is interesting that after months of protests that the Democrats nominate an old white guy and a former prosecutor who literally laughed about locking people up for smoking pot, even though she did the very same thing. And I sort of wonder to myself, what does she really bring? What does she really bring to the ticket? I mean, Karl, what do you think she brings?
What she brings? I think she brings the fact that she's not afraid to fight. She's not afraid to be nasty.
She's a prosecutor.
She's a prosecutor, right? But she also I don't think she has core beliefs. She's flexible. She'll tell you what you want to hear depending on what group you're with. She can be molded into whatever kind of candidate they want.
Carl, you're not allowed to say nasty, remember?
Oh, is that right? Okay. Well, anyway. Yeah.
That's true, yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of things I'm not allowed to say.
What did they call that? They called it, that's a gendering word.
Oh,
right?
brother.
Nasty woman?
Apparently only women are nasty.
I didn't know that. So apparently I have a lot to learn. Okay, so it's interesting. But yeah, so she is definitely the pick if you want someone who's moldable, can be controlled and contorted into whatever you want.
And big tech was happy with her as a pick because they had a very good working relationship with her in Silicon Valley, and she was not gonna go after them.
Yeah, but when you look at her record as a prosecutor, she only went after low-level stuff. She didn't go after anything of substance, at least not in my eyes.
I've heard that.
You know, and yeah, she went after like weed smokers, but she didn't do anything that was like anything that would like make a difference.
Her convictions on murder was very low compared to what you would
well,
expect.
Maybe that's why she withheld the evidence on that guy. She needed to keep those murder numbers. You know.
But why? What's the motivation for doing that?
I don't know.
If you ask me, she is out for her and for political ladder rung climbing. I don't think she really even cares necessarily about the job, number one, at least primarily. You know, she just seems transparent to me, kind of like, in a lot of ways, she reminds me of Hillary, who, frankly, her mission in life was power.
I have a meme to send you, Karl.
Do you?
About that, yeah.
I could be wrong, but that's just my impression. She doesn't seem to have much core.
I'm still trying to figure out how they get African American from Indian and Jamaican.
Interesting.
That is vexing.
Yeah.
But she was the one, I think, that went the hardest at Biden during the debates. She, you know, of course, there was that famous moment about the busing. And from that, she basically was calling him racist. She said that she believed his accusers, his sexual harassment and abuse accusers. And yet she turns around and is now running with him.
But Joe Biden, I mean, the simple fact that he's running for office in his current state shows that he loves abuse. Right? I mean, of course that's who he's going to pick.
And I think the fact that she accepted shows that she doesn't really care. She wants the job for her. She doesn't care that she disagreed with Joe all the time, left and right.
And it's interesting to watch cable news, CNN and MSNBC. I mean, you know, during the primaries, she was sort of, you know, yesterday's news, but today she's like the second coming. And if you look at the polling, what I can't figure out about her in terms of appeal is that she never even made it to a single election day in the primary. And in her own state, she was at like 7%.
She dropped out before California could even vote on it.
And there was a poll of black voters, which, you know, black voters make up, depending on the state, of course, but they make up a large percentage of Democrat primary voters. She was polling at 4% of black voters. And in the same poll, Tom Steyer was polling at 10%. So I'm going, what is she really? And I hear from, you know, I see a lot of tweets and things from black people who are not necessarily Trump supporters, but they're going, she doesn't appeal to me. So I can't figure out what really is the motivation for picking her.
You know, if you're a cynic, you could look at the big tech angle, the big business angle. They were scared to death of Stacey Abrams, for example. And yet when...
The governor of Georgia?
Yeah, right. Because they really wanted somebody like Kamala, who they're very comfortable with, has a working, cozy relationship. And as soon as she was picked, they all had a party. So if you want to be a cynic and look at it from that way, it makes sense.
I don't know. I mean, it just seemed to me that... I agree with you. I don't think that she has any core. I think that she will take any position that is, I don't know if it's most popular, but will advance
her career.
Yeah.
No comment.
Right. Okay. Yeah, maybe I'll rephrase that in the future. So, you know, the other thing I think is that he probably picked her because she is a prosecutor and she can sort of go out and make a compelling case.
Well, and Joe, I mean, they're not letting him leave the house. Yeah. So he needs somebody to go out and fight on his behalf.
Right.
I mean, at least that's all I can think of, because he needs someone out there, you know, at bat for him, designated hitter, because he can't do it himself.
One of the most fascinating things is seeing what Sean King, he's BLM, right? Mm-hmm. He said months ago, you know, the only two people I can't get behind is Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. He listed the reasons why. And then just, you know, a couple days ago, as soon as the announcement is made, what was it, yesterday, whatever, he's elated about it.
He was all about it.
All about it.
All about
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
Total role reverse, total hypocrite.
But Karl, how much of this doesn't matter? They're just going to vote for whoever's on the blue ticket, no matter what.
That's exactly right.
But the other analysis, and we're just about out of time, but the other analysis is that the people that are enthusiastic for her were going to vote for Biden anyway. And, a lot of people are saying she's, very sort of unpleasant and negative and, overbearing and all of that. And is that going to appeal to independent voters?
Yeah. Well, but I mean,
I hope not.
Especially the black voter. This is the most anti-black ticket since McGovern. Two people that are most responsible for unfairly incarcerating black people in this country are Joe Biden with his 1994 or 5 crime bill, and 1994 crime bill, and Kamala Harris as the DA in San Francisco and then the Attorney General of California.
And frankly, maybe they felt they needed a fighter because that's what she is. Joe's not. She's nasty. She'll go after Trump.
Interesting. All right. Well, TJ Suchocki and Karl Erickson, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
This is the Kyle Olson Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. This is from the Unlocked Michigan website. Since March 23rd, Michigan has been under one of the strictest lockdowns of the country due to Governor Gretchen Whitmer's abuse of power and the use of an outdated World War II-era law. Using this obscure, antiquated law, Governor Whitmer has issued a blizzard of more than 100 executive decrees, quickly closing in on 200, with no accountability to your elected representatives, no public input, and no end in sight. Unlock Michigan is organizing a petition drive to do something about that, and joining me now is Wszolek to discuss that. So first, tell me exactly what the petition does.
We have a really simple petition. Sometimes these things could take an hour or two to read. Ours is one sentence long. It simply repeals this 1945 law that allows the governor to govern by decree without any oversight from the legislature. There's another emergency powers law from 1976 that gives the governor some emergency powers in the case of a legit emergency. Like, we get hit by a hailstorm, those states paralyzed, and she has to act rapidly. That law still will be there for a governor to act. But an emergency would only last at most 28 days unless the legislature renewed the state of emergency. In this case, some governor, not necessarily this governor, some governor in the future could declare a state of emergency on their first day in office and govern that way without accountability for 4 straight years. That seems like a fairly big oversight in the way these laws were written.
Well, and of course, Governor Whitmer recently extended, what was it, the 4th time, I think, recently extended the state of emergency. There didn't seem to be a whole lot of pushback. One of my frustrations in all of this as a conservative, and for people who don't know, the Republicans control both the House and the Senate in the state legislature. One of my concerns is that it doesn't seem like there's been a whole lot of real serious pushback. And so now it's left up to citizens, and specifically your organization, Unlock Michigan, to do something about it. It's been really interesting to see on social media so many people organizing, at stores or at machine shops or parks or wherever it may be, hosting these petition signings. Talk a little bit about sort of the grassroots effort that's been going on related to the petition.
It's been pretty phenomenal. I mean, we've been at this for now actively about 5 weeks that we've been in the field circulating petitions. We had about a 2-week ramp-up period prior to that. We've now recruited about 60,000 grassroots activists to circulate petitions, and they are pretty darn self-organizing. They don't wait for instructions from headquarters. They're out there, just doing this on their own, and they're very entrepreneurial. I mean, they're exactly what you would want in this sort of instance. They go where they can, they set up, they tell people on Facebook that they're hosting these signing events, and then people come, and it's all. And then we just hear about it later, and it's fantastic. It's the most exciting sort of grassroots thing I've seen in quite a while. I mean, they're really frustrated because, the governor seems to just be calling audibles left and right. I mean, and the rules, of course, don't apply to her. So she shut down every bar in, northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula, there were 0 hospitalizations related to COVID in the Upper Peninsula at the time she shut down the bars there. The curve doesn't get any flatter than that. And of course, they have a relatively short season to make their entire year.
Right.
So he's destroying their livelihood for the entire year, and nobody understands why. Now, at the same time, the governor herself is attending a 600-person National Guard event in Grayling, and then comes to Traverse City for the memorial service for former Governor Milliken, hundreds of people at an indoor funeral that has literally been illegal now for 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
You can't get more than 10 people together to mourn your grandfather. But if it's a former governor, then 600 is fair. Whatever. I mean, people are frustrated by that. The legislature has been pushing back as hard as they can, but, face it, the legal process grinds very slowly. They'll, getting, an appeal all the way through the Supreme Court is a year-long project at a minimum. So the hands of the legislature are relatively tied when the governor can veto anything that pushes back, in any sort of systematic way.
Right. And now, instead of offering more information, because I've seen so many people say, and, I live in Muskegon County, and people say, well, what data is she using? What data is she using to make these decisions? And the media, for whatever reason, never asked that question, at least in sort of, a very assertive, demanding an answer kind of way. And now the governor has restricted her press conferences to Zoom only. So reporters can participate via Zoom, but of course that means, they can be basically regulated and they can't just necessarily ask any question they want. So she's really sort of restricted any sort of questioning. So talk a little bit about, you mentioned the 60,000 activists who are participating, which, that has to be unprecedented in and of itself, to have 60,000 activists, average citizens saying, I want to do something about this, and I'm going to circulate petitions. Where does that put you in the process? Because how many petition signatures do you need?
We need to turn in 340,000 valid signatures. So we're going to turn in, we think, around 500,000, just to pick a round number. Mm-hmm. That gives us enough margin of error to be fine when they validate our signatures. And there will be some mistakes made, and there's a lot of ways a signature on a petition can go wrong. If you use ditto marks because your husband signed ahead of you, that's one way they can disqualify your signature. Use ditto marks for your address or your zip code or something. We also know that the left is organizing on Facebook, and we see a stream of posts all around every day encouraging people to go sign with fake names and to sign repeatedly so that those signatures can be disqualified. Of course, that's election fraud. That's illegal. So they're, in a systematic conspiracy, I'll use that word, they're organizing on Facebook to defraud this petition collection process. So good luck with that. But we announced about a week and a half ago that we were at the first 100,000 signatures in the first 3 weeks. We'll probably hit another milestone in a little while coming up here, and we're going to knock this out pretty quickly. We have 180 days from the launch to collect our signatures, but we're not going to take anywhere near that long given the level of grassroots activism that's out there.
So explain, you get the 500,000 signatures, you get the sufficient amount, whatever that ends up being. What happens after that?
They go to the Bureau of Elections and they validate, the number of signatures that we've turned in. And then from there, the Board of State Canvassers certifies the sufficiency. And then the legislature has 40 session days to vote on our proposal. If they pass it, it becomes law without needing the governor's signature. If they don't pass it in that period of time, or they actually defeat it on a roll call vote, then it goes on the 2022 ballot alongside the re-election of this governor.
Has Speaker Chatfield and Majority Leader Wszolek indicated what they would do?
This language has already passed the state Senate. So we're extremely confident that they would vote the same way if given another chance. And we understand that Speaker Chatfield is, enthusiastically for this and would be very likely to bring it to a vote. We can't predict the future, but our activists are going to be pressing their candidates for the legislature very hard to take a stand on this. And then we'll hold them to that, when this comes before the legislature.
So if someone wants to get involved, how can they do that?
Then go to unlockmichigan.com and sign up, and we'll get petitions in their hands right away. We're having some problems with the Postal Service on some of that. As you might have read, the Postal Service is not making itself proud right now. But we'll get you petitions as rapidly as we possibly can. And, get involved. I mean, if you want to just help out and you don't want to, bother with going to our website, just go on Facebook and look for Unlock Michigan. And if there's an event already happening near you, just show up and help out. And they'll show you how to get it done and how to circulate petitions properly. It's not that hard. And there's a lot of patriots out there working hard every week to make this happen fast.
Yeah, it's really amazing to see. And it's amazing to see the number of people, because I'm based in Michigan. I've been covering a lot of the lockdowns and the protests and all of that, and the governor's executive orders for Breitbart. And it's really amazing to see, I guess what I would call the disconnect between what the governor is doing and the practical reality. I mean, you take schools, for example. They're supposed to be opening in the next couple weeks. I personally am in a situation where I would have kids in 3 different schools: high school, middle school, and elementary school. And there's a very real prospect that I will be, managing their education. And there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of concern about that, about the practical implication of closing schools, of telling people that they can't work, making it, or I don't know about making it, but certainly not making it easy for people to file for unemployment, all of that sort of thing. And so it's really interesting to see people sort of channel their frustration when it comes to this sort of thing. So Fred Wszolek, he is with Unlock Michigan. Again, you can go to unlockmichigan.com to participate. But thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much.
This is the Kyle Olson Show. Thanks for joining me today. For more of my work, go to Breitbart.com or find me on Twitter, Kyle Olson4. Use the same handle for Parler, Kyle Olson4. KYLEOLSON and the number 4. Again, this is the Kyle Olson Show.